first of all, I'd like to thank you for organizing this conference and for inviting me. It's a great pleasure for me. Great conference, great discussion, great colleagues, great food. Everything is fine. And let's get into my topic. My topic is Beneš Decrees in connection with the accession of the Czech Republic to the EU. You know, while I was working on the national report for the Czech Republic, I came across the Beneš Decrees and I found out that actually it's a bit shameful, but I didn't know much about it. And that's why I decided I will talk about it here because, and I took it purely from a historical retrospective perspective. Beneš Decrees are a lesson to be learned, right? Which is a subtitle of this conference. So I think it suits here pretty well. Just a little explanation: what actually are the Beneš Decrees? They were a kind of legislative acts that were accepted by the government in London in exile during the Second World War, mainly in 1945 and 46, and they are named after Dr. Edvard Beneš, who was a Czechoslovakian president back then and even some years after the Second World War. And after the end of the war, those decrees were approved by the National Assembly of the Czechoslovakia, and they were also officially published. And that's how they became a part of the Czechoslovakian legal order, and some of them are still valid until now, so we can say some of them are part of the Czech legal order even. So there are 144 of them, and most of them, they don't cause any troubles. I mean, not in relation to the accession process of the Czech Republic. But I mean, some of them are, you know, amending the constitution. Some of them were related to economic and financial reforms, which were absolutely needed after the Second World War. Some of them were like stating that we'll be using a Central European time. And those were fine, but there are, let's say, 10 of them, which were kind of controversial or problematic. And those decreases were actually related to German and Hungarian minority living in the Czechoslovakia. Well, I hope you don't mind, but I'll be speaking just about the German minority because that caused the problems in relation to the accession process. Actually, after the war, I would say for the decades, that was not the best idea to talk about the Beneš Decrees. But after the Velvet Revolution in 1989, let's say during the 90s, time has changed and there started to be some discussions. And in 1999, while the Czech Republic was preparing for the accession, there were some reservation. Reservation appeared in connection with the compatibility of the so-called Beneš Decrees with the acquis communautaire, with the EU law as such. And those two, let's say, problematic decreases were related to confiscation of properties of, let's say, the state unreliable persons, which were German minority mainly. And that was also a retribution decree which established people's courts to, you know, to punish the Nazi criminals and even the Czechoslovakian people who were kind of supporting them. And that was a confiscation decree as well, dealing with a quick, let's say, distribution of agriculture property and the fields which belonged to Germans and enemies of the Czech and Slovak nation, and basically based on all these decreases, the German minority lost their property rights, and they also lost their civil rights and nationality, the Czechoslovakian nationality. So it's a quite big issue. Just I would like to mention here. When we speak about the displacements or deportations of the Germans, they are not based in Beneš Decrees. You know, none of the Beneš Decree ordered the displacement of the German population. That was like an act of an international law, which was decided at the Potsdam Conference, which took place in 1945 and of course was approved by the big players of that time, so even nowadays. Soviet Union, Great Britain, United States, and even later was approved by other countries like France. And based of this decision, there was approximately 2.7 million people, let's say, sorry, 2.7 million Germans displaced from Czechoslovakia. 2.7 million, that's like a huge number, you know? We're not speaking here about, I don't know, 200 or something. So you see the topic is quite controversial, and 2.7 million, while 1.7 million were displaced to the western part of the country, which was controlled by Americans, and 750,000 were displaced to the eastern part of the eastern occupation zone, which was controlled by Soviet Union. And I just want to mention here, because I think it's pretty fair to mention it, these displacements were not always happening in the best way. Since the end of the Second World War till January 1946, so let's say for like 8-9 months, there was something happening in the Czechoslovakia which was called like a wild displacement. After that, the displacement were in a more, like, let's say, organized manner. Definitely nothing to be proud of, but it's fair to mention it, and these things were happening. Just to give you a little background, you know, those Germans who were displaced and they were in the eastern part of the Germany, in the Soviet occupation zone, they were not really complaining much because they were under the Soviet influence, so nobody was asking them. But those Germans, this 1.7 million of people who were displaced into the western part of Germany, they were, of course, they refused to accept their situation, and they tried to change it, and they were forming political groups and tried to do some changes since 50s, and what they asked for was actually the right for homeland. They tried to get back to the, as we call it, the Sudetenland, the land where the Germans were living previously. They wanted to get back their properties, they wanted to get back their civil rights, agriculture fields, and so on, which from the position, of course, of that state was not really realistic expectation. But after the Velvet Revolution, the first Czechoslovakian president, Václav Havel, actually apologized to these Germans who were displaced, and he said, of course, changing of the borders, that won't be possible, and even giving back the property rights cannot be considered, but still we are sorry for the way you were displaced and for the suffering that you get through. During the 90s, the relationships were not the best, but we, both sides, not just the Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, but both sides, Germany too, try to improve it. For example, in 1992, that was a treaty signed between the Czechoslovakian Republic and Germany, treaty on good neighborhood and friendly cooperation. And then even after some troubles in 1997, there was a declaration between Czech and Germans saying that there was a declaration on mutual relation and future development, and Germany kind of stipulated that the Federal Republic of Germany will fully support the admission of the Czech Republic to the EU and to NATO, and that was important for us. Well, as I said, during the 90s, the debate started, and even we have a decision of the Czech Constitutional Court from 1995, where the court was actually concerning the repeal of the decree on the confiscation of property of enemies and the National Reconstruction Funds. National Reconstruction Funds was a system within which the previous property from the Germans were quickly distributed to to Czech and Slovaks and other nations too, because of course 2.7 million people, had to leave, and quite frankly, we didn't have enough people to to replace them, because a lot of them were farmers, and somebody needed to do the hard work, and we didn't have enough people. So we offer the properties also to other, let's say, friendly nations, other Slavic countries or citizens. But what is important here? The Constitutional Court of the Czech Republic stated that decrees of the President of the Republic can no longer establish any new legal relationship for several reasons. The first one, they were already replaced by new regulations or law, or they have already been implemented and cannot and don't need to be applied. And what is important, the validity of the legal relationships established by Beneš Decrees remain intact. It's important, however, that the rights and obligations established by them remain unquestionable for reasons of legal certainty, which makes sense because, of course, the properties were already acquired by new owners. And even they pay for it. They didn't pay a lot, but they did, So the legal certainty was a very important issue here. But what were the objections of the EU? Actually, if you see the last report from 2002 that the Commission issued on how the Czech Republic is prepared for the accession, then if you see the chapter dealing with civil and political rights, it's written there that there has been an extensive public discussion about the Beneš Decrees, which is true. And even the European Parliament was involved, because in 1999 it issued a resolution actually and demanding the cancellation of all the decrees and laws related to displacement of individual ethnic groups. And because they said very clearly it was a violation of human rights and so on. So in 2002, this resolution actually led into a debate or huge discussion between Miloš Zeman, who was, at that time he was a prime minister, later he was a president, but in 2002 he was a prime minister, and he was on the side of the Czech Republic, of course. And on the other side, that was Austrian ruling party. I have just a shortcut here of the name FPO. And they were kind of threatening us. Okay, we'll use our right for the veto and we'll not let you join the EU. And that was a problem for the Czech Republic that needed to be solved, of course. And even the European Parliament began to deal with this question of whether or not the Beneš Decrees are in conflict with the acquis communautaire. So what would be the inconsistency of the EU law? Primary inconsistency with Article 6, Paragraph 1, TEU, which says that the Union recognizes the rights, freedom, and principles set out in the chapter of fundamental rights. And then Article 49, which actually refers to Article 2, including all the values which Mary already mentioned, and I think some of our colleagues yesterday mentioned it as well. And the debate started. There was quite a significant number of Czech legal experts who have commented this issue. Quite logically, most of them were standing for the Czech Republic, and they say that even like annulment of the Beneš Decrees would be rather a symbolic gesture, or they said that we have to, of course, protect the rights that are acquired in the good faith. That means we have to protect the new owners, and they were not just the first generation, because they were talking about this issue 60 years after the end of the war, so there was like a second or even third generation of the owners. And one of the experts even mentioned that, by annulment of this Beneš Decrees, we would, we would actually lose ourselves, because we would deny that the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia was actually fighting against Nazi Germany. This issue has not only the legal level, but also political level, social level, and so on. If we speak about the political level, Again, we are still in the same year, 2002, where the EU Enlargement Commissioner visited Prague and made a very clear and very positive joint statement with Prime Minister Miloš Zeman. Basically, they said, and this sentence I really like, they declared that the very essence of European integration is to move forward and not to look back. So that's a nice one. And at the same time, they say, of course, the Beneš Decrees and the other measures taken by the other European countries, that was not just the Czechoslovakia, would not stand up to nowadays standards, and they belong to history. But still, Beneš Decrees are not part of the entry negotiation, and they should not have any influence on the negotiation process because they are not constituting any new relationship. There were several legal opinions, legal studies made by experts, and they had just one main goal, to check the current validity and legal scope of the Beneš Decrees and to check the compatibility with the acquis communautaire, EU legislation, Copenhagen criteria, and international law as such. The first opinion was made by Professor Frowein, I hope I pronounce his surname correctly, who was or maybe is director of the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law, and at the same time he was vice president of the European Commission for Human Rights. The second study was made by Dr. Bernitz, professor of EU law at the Stockholm University, and the last study made by Lord Kingsland, a British legal expert. And finally, these authors, like all of them, issued a joint conclusion, which is entitled Legal Assessment of the Beneš Decrees and the Accession of the Czech Republic to the European Union. And even the European Commission, after speaking with the Czech legal experts, concluded and issued a final analysis. Again, we are still in the same year, 2002. The analysis was called the Czechoslovak Presidential Decrees in the light of the acquis communautaire. Results, just to sum it up, I divided it into, let's say, 4 main questions. Question number 1 is related to the decrease of the property rights, meaning the confiscation of property and the loss of ownership rights. Basically, all of them highlighted that it's a matter that was fully concluded between 1945 and 46. And on the basis of Beneš Decrees, they were established a new ownership rights. And the people rely on them for more than 50 years or 60 years. Now it's about 80. So we cannot change it because that would be against the principle of legitimate expectations and legal certainty, which I already mentioned. And then they mentioned the expropriation and the conditions given by the Czech law and so on. What is important here in relation to the primary law, Article 6 and Article 46 TU, they said that none of these articles refer to the past and cannot reopen question of confiscations terminated long time ago in the legal system of the acceding country. Moreover, the expropriation was in accordance with the international agreements of the Allies on post-war reparations. So basically, and that's what this legal studies mentions quite a lot, is that you should always see the situation how it was after the Second World War in Europe, and this situation can never be compared to nowadays situation, of course. The second issue is the question of discrimination, whether there was a discrimination on the basis of nationality in the framework or restitution, or let me put it that way, that's not the question, because the discrimination was clearly there, Beneš Decrees were not the best, actually. They were based on the collective blame and the discrimination based on the nationality or ethnicity. But the question is whether the Czech Republic should be responsible for it within the accession process. And the answer is pretty clear. Thankfully, no. because the Professor Frowein concluded, based on the case law of the European Court of Justice, that the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of nationality can only be effected from the moment of the country's accession to the EU. So that would mean can be effected from 2004. Luckily for us, more or less the European Commission came to the same opinion. Third question, decrees related to civil rights, meaning issue of citizenship and human rights. All of these legal opinions basically states that it's not a question anymore, and they were referring to Article 9 TU, which we might know is basically stating that every person who has a nationality of a member state has a nationality of the European Union as well, and it complements the nationality of the member state, it doesn't replace it. So they all basically agreed that the issue does not cause any problems in the context of EU accession, which was fine. Last one, that's the only thing that could kind of cause problems. That was the retributive decree. The one who was actually giving the criminal sanction. Based on these decrees, a special criminal court were established, and they tried to sanction against the person who collaborated with the Nazis, or they tried to punish the Nazis themselves. But the problem was, of course, a lot of them ran away, and they were issuing the decisions in absence. So the people were not there, they had no right for a fair trial, they could not defend themselves, and so on and so on. The provision of the retributive decree was abolished at the beginning of 1948, so just three years after the war. That was fine, but the opinion just said that we should be careful, because it may happen that the person who was actually sentenced based on this retributive decree will once enter the territory of the Czech Republic and will be still guilty, you know. But I don't think, because the time plays for us here. You know, in 2002, that was like nearly 60 years after the end of the war. Now it's, let's say, 80 years after the end of the war. So most probably, if that would be some case like that, the person would already pass away. Or maybe would be like 100-something years old, which is not very likely, right? Just one thing is pretty interesting here, actually. The European Commission, according to the Commission's findings from the criminal court, people's courts sentence in absentia only in 4 cases, which it's a question how punctual the criminal records were. I'm pretty sure that not all the cases are there, but they found just 4 cases, which is not a lot. So what is the conclusion? As you may know, Czech Republic is a member of the European Union. So we were granting a green card, and hopefully the Beneš Decrees were solved forever. And just a little mention, you know, concerning the request of the European Parliament to cancel all decrees and laws concerning the displacement of individual ethnic groups. Because of the results of all these legal studies, finally it was not compliant with the request, and that was all. So that's all for me, and thank you for your attention.